Thank you so much for having us here. So as I was saying yesterday, we're AUDIENCENET. We are a market and social research company, but we tend to stay away from the very consumer stuff like hair shampoo or shoes. As rewarding as I'm sure that is as well, we tend to work with clients that we feel or that are having a positive social impact. So especially in the refugee space over the last few years, that's something that we are very passionate about, and myself as a specialist in intercultural relations, it's something that we're really privileged to be working on, and hope the findings are relevant for yourselves. Very aware that we're not public health specialists, so it is a more sort of take on what citizens and refugees are sort of their views. So just a quick overview of what I'll be covering. So first of all, the projects and objectives. So essentially what we tend to do with the Tent Foundation, who's our main client in this space. Then I'll work with refugees, and then a few key findings or topic areas out of our public perceptions work. And then if we can get to them, some implications for policy. So yes, so the Tent Foundation, I'm not sure how many of you are aware of them, but they are based in the States. They were set up by Hamdi Alakaya, who is of Turkish origin and is a businessman in America. And the topic of refugees and trying to help displaced people realize their potential is something he's very passionate about. So please do look at them in your own time. Our work in this space with them tends to be in two key areas. So first of all, the yearly tracking of international public attitudes. So we've got 12 countries at the minute. And then as of last year, we did a big study across Germany, Greece, and Jordan, where we spoke to 1,500 refugees to gain their perspectives. So we'll start off just quickly a little bit about the methodologies. And there are 12 individual country reports. Feel free to read them in your own time. There's also a summary document for those of you that may not have as much time required to read each of them. But yeah, just to give you a quick overview. So I think the key thing to pull out here is for us, when we're asking citizens' views, it's not just how do they currently feel, you know, what is the status there, but it's looking at what impacts that. So what can we do to then either amplify positive attitudes or change ones that are maybe not quite as positive. So we look at personal circumstances, their interest in public affairs, where they get that information, and then obviously compassion and towards refugees, and then concerns for host countries, etc. The main wave that I'll be discussing is the second year, and that took place end of December last year, and then went into January of this year. Here are the countries that we cover and the sample sizes. Everything is weighted to be demographically and statistically representative of each of the countries. So yeah, broadly on our refugee voices, so we had 1,500 plus refugees we interviewed in Germany, Greece, and Jordan. And to try to make sure that this was as representative as possible, we had the questionnaire translated into these 9 languages. And we also went for a split of in-camp and out-of-camp interviews. But given where we did go, and in order to get a sense of almost uniformity and with what we were trying to push with our story, they ended up largely being people of Syrian descent, and I think Iraqi, Irani, and Afghani were the other sort of key groups, but vast majority were Syrian. So a quick overview of refugees' perspectives. There's a lot. The report, I do encourage you to read it. Hopefully it's of interest. Definitely very powerful work. I spent time here in Greece last year, and our other teams were in the other countries. But just pulling out the key points that are hopefully of relevance to you based on the discussions over the last couple of days. So the key themes here for us are the idea of gratitude and determination to be able to integrate and to move their lives forward. So to say here, we've got a few stats up top about 9 in 10 refugees felt integration was important, and importantly 9 in 10 felt confident that they'd be able to achieve it. 8 in 10 were wanting to work, but obviously, or looking for work, but it was proving difficult because of their status. In Germany, 9 in 10 were learning the language, and a couple of other things here. 9 in 10 want to integrate. 7 in 10 agree with the laws in Greece and Germany about human rights. And then a couple of sort of fun facts, other things that I guess the more commercial side of what we do, we want to put out in the public domain. So people were asked what their favorite things were about their host countries, and football was mentioned by about 50% of people. And then we have 47% of people really valued outdoor activities. And also an important stat, 8 in 10 wanted to be able to meet people from host countries and try to make friends. So we wanted to put across that more human element. But there are obviously concerns and drawbacks, so just to point those out here as well. 1 in 4 had faced harassment or abuse in their host country. 1 in 4 had experienced physical abuse in their host country, and 1 in 4 again said that they felt a sense of increased stigma or hostility towards them as a result of terrorist attacks. A couple of other key points. So when asked in their own words what one message they would want to give to their host countries, the overwhelming one was of gratitude. So 75% of people said something related to thank you. And then a few other points as well, but that for us was pretty massive. Then thinking about the future, and they essentially want their lives to normalize in some way. Like, we asked them what they would want in the next year, and so you have peace and peace and end to war, some wanting to return to their home countries, but people just generally wanting to be able to start again. And a few quotes here which we hope that you find as powerful as us, but starting on the left. So I hope to be with my family again and celebrate Eid together. I really miss them. The one in the middle, I just want inner and psychological peace and a chance to live without the constant anxiety I have had for so long, which I know was pointed to so much yesterday. And then the final one here, just really put on my glasses, to just have a good life somewhere like they had in Syria, so wherever it might be. Okay, that's a whistle stop of the refugees' perspectives. Now on to public perceptions. So our first key area is awareness and knowledge of the refugee crisis. I should point out where there are country differences, big ones, we try and flag them, but they're more comprehensively covered in our 40-page summary, which is online. So, when asked where their concerns about the refugee crisis stand relative to other national and global concerns, it's very, very close. It's very up there. So 8 in 10 people were concerned about the refugee crisis, and this increases considerably for certain countries. Greece at 93%, 90%, and then goes down as probably we'd expect. But it's definitely high on people's agendas. Then when asked where it is relative to other crises, overwhelmingly, people saw it as a very serious issue, and half of people said that it was the most pressing crisis the world had ever faced. So there's a definite sense that it's a big problem. They are aware. But importantly, when asked about, okay, well, what are the key reasons for this happening, beyond war, so 90% of people were saying war, there was actually little knowledge or little reference to other safety factors or other concerns. So this is just one slide. We had a few metrics on it, but you've got like sort of half of people saying religious persecution and then a few others, but it doesn't come out as strongly as you would think. So there's not perhaps as much educational knowledge about exactly what's going on. And then 42% of people were of the view that, maybe it's economic and motivated for those reasons. In terms of compassion and concerns for refugees, so again, just one of the many slides that we have on this, but the key themes were people are concerned, they do get it, the fact that there's this massive impact on families, being broken up, the emotional stress of experiencing violence and the journeys that they've gone on, and also the practicalities of fleeing, so leaving everything behind, having to start again. There are those concerns there that we can certainly tap into with messaging. Then in terms of host countries, so this is important, a few dense slides coming up, but there are 3 main concerns for host countries, so security, culture, and the economy. So we go to security first. So the main thing here is that there is a concern about the increased risk of terrorism, with 65% of people fearing that by taking in refugees that it would lead to an increase. And there are definite anxieties around Islam, with about half of people of the view associating it with extremism or intolerance. The positive, 20% of people around that do see it as peaceful or having the ability to integrate. But a definite connection between, Islam and maybe anxieties around that, and then the sense of fears of security. But 4 in 10 of those who were fearful about security had a pragmatic approach, which was great to see, and they were of the view that actually these security concerns could be to a degree mitigated with diligence and policies. So by no means is it all kind of, no, don't let them in at all. So that, I think, is something to hold on to. In terms of culture, so you have a few different things, but largely the impact on society as a whole, and then also some for specific groups. So the main area being willingness to accept laws and customs. So there was a concern amongst about 6 in 10 people that would people accept these, which perhaps is maybe the Muslim impact, thinking about Sharia laws and whatever it might be, and a lack of kind of understanding of that and fearfulness as a result. Then 48% of people were worried about the impact on local culture and the community, and that was particularly high in Turkey, probably because of the number of people. Then specific groups, you have some concerns around acceptance of gender or LGBT rights. In terms of the economy, now this is a really important fact that we looked at from a few different angles. But the thing to say here is that actually it's a bit inconclusive. So 6 in 10 people were worried about the cost to their countries, the immediate cost of taking in refugees. In terms of, the other 4 in 10 weren't so much. So it just depends how you want to sort of see it. But the long-term impact, you've got about half thinking that refugees can positively contribute to the economies, and then the other half thinking they're a burden. Similarly, in terms of refugees' intentions, you've got a relatively even split between those who think they're willing to work hard and those who think they're just looking for handouts. So that for us is an opportunity that people have not made up their minds, so there is a way of perhaps trying to persuade them. Shifting perceptions. So yeah, now we know all of this, how do we go about changing it? And there is a lot of literature out there, a lot done by the Overseas Development Institute, by ourselves, a lot of different organizations. So I do suggest having a read of everything because it's quite complex. But generally, the key thing is that when their opinions are being formed about current affairs, actually it's word of mouth that tops the list. So 70% of people, it's talking with friends and family that influences their opinion about public affairs. Also, there is appetite for kind of more curated content, so movies, videos, and the likes, and also opinion-driven content and social media. Those bottom 2 factors are more so in certain countries, but it's a whole range of things that influence opinion. This is, however, there's a sense, despite word of mouth being really important, there's a sense that actually people don't really speak their true opinions about refugees. And only half of people felt comfortable doing that themselves. Then here are country differences in terms of level of comfort giving your opinions about refugees. There's also a large sense, only 2 in 10 people felt that the media report openly and honestly about the refugee crisis. So again, for us, this is an interesting one. I think people do look critically, and I think that's an important factor. They're not just taking stuff at face value. They can kind of see that emotions are heightened. So perhaps another opportunity. Okay, this gets a little confusing, but those who reported having a change in attitude towards refugees in the last year, be it positive or negative, were asked what had influenced that. So here are the people who had a positive change. I will flag that base sizes are relatively small. We have about 1,000 here, but if you break that down by country, it's just be cautious. So the key themes were information about refugees' hardships, so documentaries, whatever it might be, things they had faced, and also empathy, so imagining being in their situation. Factors that we thought might actually prove really important were less so. So facts and figures on where refugees had come from, the global impact of the crisis and the economy were less influential on this particular group. So also something to bear in mind for messaging and things. And then this is broken down here. Okay, moving on to the last section, which is about providing support. So the key themes here are that let's start with the left. So just 1 in 10 did not feel that their country had a responsibility to accept refugees. And 7 in 10 were willing to financially support refugees, either through donations or indirectly through taxes. And though these scores on the right actually look really low, it's just the way the question was framed. So people were asked to pick their top actors or top kind of people from the list, organizations, countries that had the most responsibility, and then pick their overall top 1. So that came to 36% of people saying that all countries had the most responsibility to contribute, and then 20% saying the United Nations. Again, in our work, there's a very interesting dynamic about people feeling pride at what their country had done or has done towards refugees, and that's a key factor as well to bear in mind in terms of motivating and changing opinions. Lastly, here in terms of policies, so we asked about a range of policies that they would or wouldn't support, and the ones that get the most immediate sort of backing are the ones that are looking after, well, immediate needs such as basic healthcare and shelter, and policies perhaps for the long term facilitating integration and resettlement had varying degrees of support, but were very much supported in places like Canada and Sweden, I believe it was. Okay, so just to wrap up, do I have a couple of minutes still? Just 1, 2? Okay, so here are policy recommendations. There's probably a lot to take in, so I would encourage you to come up with your own, but ours are just 6 points. So first of all, increasing awareness of the complexities of the situations refugees face in their home countries could actually positively impact sympathy. Concerns around Islam and security are real, but I think, or they are there, they're prominent, so it's just about negotiating that. So perhaps showing how people have integrated or assuring them of counterterrorism or security policies. Again, with integration, positive examples of how people have done it and how they are following and valuing local customs and laws could help as well. The point about the economy was made at length earlier, but it's inconclusive. So kind of trying to show people or mitigate those concerns is definitely something that we advocate. Information sources, yes, there are a complete range that do influence opinion, and that, you know, it's great because actually the media and other people with a social impact on their mind can have an influence, but word of mouth is maybe capped to a degree because people aren't necessarily giving their truest opinions. Yeah, and then in terms of policies, I think a justification of what the benefits are could really help people feel a little bit more comfortable with the financial investment into them. But yes, that is us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sania, for this very interesting presentation on the citizen perception. Is there any question for Sania? Yeah.
We were discussing, and we found very weird that only 18% wanted to go back to work or study. And this was among the question you asked to the refugees. And only 10% were willing to reunite again with the family.
This one. So, yes. Yeah, that's a little bit of they would just ask their one message or the one thing they would want. So it's not, this was not a list, this was a free text. If there was one thing you could have in the future, what would it be? So yeah, that's where these figures, yeah, it's more thematic, but good point.
It's a very interesting presentation about perceptions. I think the problem with perceptions is that they're very fluid. Any type of event of yesterday will influence the perception of today. So especially when looking at your sample sizes, and I'm sure it's statistically very sound, but I then wonder, like, did you take it in account? For example, like a difference between a refugee that had just arrived in a state might have shown different numbers compared to someone who's already waiting for 6 months. So did you stratify that in your analysis and your recommendations and things like that?
In terms of our refugee sample, the refugees we spoke to, so in our report we do break it down by length of basically how long they've been there. We did capture those metrics. There was also a very big qualitative perspective. I think people start to it's hard, it's constantly like things aren't changing, but for me their resilience, as was pointed out by a few other people, was very strong, and they're still very determined. I think it's how realistic they think it is, I don't know, but that's interesting because when we were talking to them, what came out in the data was very different. So it was this determination, even though there you can see that people are struggling, they're tired, they're, you know, so it is in the report, but luckily overarchingly they were very hopeful about the future. So, but yeah, please do have a look. It's all available on tent.org and their research page.
And on the other side, I found it very hopeful to see that people in their hosting countries, you know, they're actually very open-minded about it. And I think it's something that we need to keep in mind as well, is that although the media kind of sees it as like a lot of resistance, there are a lot of people who are actually willing to help contribute, but actually have no idea how to actually do that.
Yes.
And I think it's something we should definitely look into as well.
No, definitely. And there were quite a lot of slides in there that I had to take out, but exactly on that, half of people want to do more and they just don't quite know how to. So,
yeah, there is another question here.
Yeah, it's for you the question, and for the colleague who presented also, for example, the sexual violence and this. I mean, when you ask the refugees or the individuals that you are interviewing, have you suffered or have you encountered with any sexual violence like this? Do you explain to them, because its definition is different from where we come from, or in Europe or in Sweden, because in our countries maybe, I mean, verbal, for example, you know, harassment and saying, you have these things, you know, I don't want to give examples. They consider it just normal. So if she's a female, she wouldn't complain, and you will consider it that she had. So do you have that
yeah,
consideration?
that's a very good question. For us, we were very careful about what it was we were and were not trying to do, and also be mindful of the fact that camps had let us in, and we didn't want to. So in research, we were just cautious of the psychological impact it might have. So we did ask, we did have a question on, had you experienced any of the following? And we had interpreters with us there to talk to people, but it was certainly, we stayed a bit clear because we didn't want to kind of pull out those feelings and emotions. People did speak to us about it, but and it's in the data and it was presented, but again, we wanted to empower, we wanted to get their voices out. So certainly, and we're not experts in that field, so I can't say we did, but in terms of the other. No, for sure. It's definitely, it's something that we were thinking about, and even our work with children and stuff, we are very careful about making sure we have experts, and we've sort of just steered clear of that in our space, just because we do know that it is very complicated, and we don't want to report the wrong sort of stuff. But no, thank you. That's a good point.
Great, thanks.